Hello, my name is Ian Hardie, and I'm Treasurer of the United Reformed Church.
And hello from me too. My name is John Piper, and I am the Deputy Treasurer of the United Reformed Church. Thank you for joining Ian and me for this conversation about pensions.
And that brings me to my first question, John. I know that Pensions Committee and Finance Committee are asking General Assembly to think about the future of the URC's pension schemes. But why? And why now? I'm sure that lots of members of General Assembly will not be very interested in nor feel qualified to discuss ministers' and church staff pensions. You've already taken up a lot of time at General Assembly and Mission Council depressing people about the deficit on the minister's pension fund. Given the problems all our churches are facing as a result of the pandemic, wouldn't it be better to kick this into the long grass and leave it for our successors to deal with?
Ian, that's a very attractive idea as I come to the end of my term as Deputy Treasurer this year. However, there are two main reasons why this issue has become very urgent. The first is that the annual costs of the Minister's Pension Fund in particular are about to rise dramatically. That is because the pensions regulator is insisting on a much more prudent approach. And this is on top of the substantial increases in costs already caused by low interest rates over the last decade. The second reason is that we are asking the Synod trusts and the URC Trust to find around £45 million over the next 10 years to put into the Minister's Pension Fund, so that the promises already made to members of the pension fund are funded at a more prudent level. Some of those trusts, understandably, want to know that the problem cannot get worse before they put their money in. It is also important to say that there are good alternatives available that might deliver better results for the members of the pension schemes, as well as controlling the costs for the church.
What scale of cost increases are you talking about?
In 2020, the church paid around £2 million in pensions contributions for the active ministers in the Minister's Pension Fund. Based on estimates from the scheme actuary, it looks as though the cost in 2022 will be around £3.5 million. An increase of 1.5 million.
Wow, the budget only just balances as it is, and that would be almost a 10% increase in costs. Local churches continue to be very generous, but declining membership means that each year the giving to the M&M fund goes down slightly. That could force us to make radical cuts in the number of ministers or the other activities of the church. Okay, I see why this needs to be talked about now. Let's get back to basics. How many pension schemes does the URC have, and who are the members?
At denominational level, the church currently operates two pension schemes. The Minister's Pension Fund covers almost all ministers and church-related community workers. The URC Finals Salary Scheme is mostly for church house lay staff, plus some staff at most of the synods and at Westminster College and at Northern College.
And my understanding is that these are both defined benefit pension schemes. Can you explain what that means?
So in a defined benefit pension scheme, the method of calculating the pension is fixed. In both the URC schemes, a member of those schemes earns a pension of 1/80th of salary or stipend for each year of service. Although the method of calculating the pension is fixed, the amount of the pension is not known in advance. That usually depends on the level of salary or stipend at retirement, and that will depend on many factors, including inflation. The church is legally obliged to meet the total cost of those pensions other than the member contributions, whatever that cost turns out to be. And no one knows exactly what that cost will be, at least not until all the members have died. The contributions paid by the church and by the members are based on estimates of those costs. Low interest rates have caused those costs to rise sharply over recent years. The regulator has now decided that those estimates have to be much more prudent, and so the size of the contributions has gone up further. In relation to the Minister's Pension Fund, that is partly because the scheme is maturing, which basically means that there is more going out of the fund in pensions than is coming in as contributions for those who are still working. Those contributions paid each year are invested until they are needed. And if those investments underperform, then the cost will go up and the church will have to pay more.
Okay, so let's talk about other options. I know that the main alternative to a defined benefit scheme is a defined contribution scheme, but how do they differ?
This time, the level of the contributions by the church and by the members are fixed at an agreed level, and they are invested on behalf of the members. At retirement, each member has a pension pot, which is used to provide their retirement income. So this really works the other way round. The cost to the church is fixed, but the income available in retirement will depend on how the investments have performed. On the other hand, it's important to stress that there are potentially significant advantages for the members. There is considerable flexibility in operating these schemes. There is more personal choice around investment policy, and the regulator's requirements on DC schemes are not as restrictive. There is also a lot of flexibility in terms of how and when the pension pot is used. So a member could receive a steady income as with the current schemes, or they could decide to take out lump sums for special purposes. Also, any residue in the pension pot following the death of a member and any spouse becomes an asset that can be passed on to their beneficiaries, though possibly subject to tax.
But wouldn't closing the existing schemes and starting a defined contribution scheme involve the church in reneging on its commitment to look after its ministers and employees in their retirement?
The group that has begun to look into this does not believe so. It used to be the case that a defined benefit scheme was seen as the gold standard for pensions provision. We believe recent changes in the pensions market and the increasing restrictions being imposed on the trustees of defined benefit schemes have eroded their worth to the point where they are no longer either good value for money, nor necessarily in the best financial interests of many of the members. We believe, on the contrary, that it would be a betrayal of the covenant with our ministers and lay staff if we failed to consider alternatives to the existing schemes. And remember that there won't be any change unless General Assembly agrees to it.
But how would closure of the current schemes affect the pension entitlement of members built up over the many years they've been in either scheme so far?
Benefits already earned by members of the defined benefit schemes are legally protected. Any changes would focus on the pension benefits to be earned in the future.
The assets of both the current schemes are currently ethically invested. Would that be the same with a defined contribution scheme?
There are now a range of providers offering ethical investment arrangements for defined contribution schemes, so we don't think that will be a problem.
Okay, let's cut to the chase. How will a pension in the new scheme compare with a pension from the current schemes?
Ian, that's an easy question for you to ask, but it's not so easy to answer. We have looked at the likely outcomes of a few defined contribution scheme designs, but we will need to do a lot more detailed work before we can make a specific recommendation and provide accurate answers to your questions. One of the challenges is that any change of pension arrangements is likely to affect each member differently, depending on, among other things, their age, whether they're married or have other dependents, whether they had other pensionable employment before becoming members of our schemes, their length of service, and possibly their health as well. If General Assembly asks us to take this exercise forward, we will have to consult formally with current scheme members. And at that stage, we will probably try to talk to each person about their own individual circumstances.
Hang on a minute. It sounds as if you haven't worked out how this defined contribution scheme would work. How can General Assembly be expected to make a decision?
At the moment, we are asking General Assembly to agree in principle that the current two pension schemes should be closed to future accruals. And then we're asking Assembly to authorise the work that we need to do in order to produce a specific recommendation. The work done so far gives us assurance that a defined contribution scheme would be affordable to the Church and could be expected to deliver good pensions for the members who will be most heavily dependent on their church pensions in retirement. But we have not wanted to incur significant costs designing every last detail of such a scheme when General Assembly may decide that it is not interested. In the paper for General Assembly, we have modelled 3 scenarios based on someone spending 40 years in ministerial service. We have looked at someone just joining at the age of 28, someone aged 43 who has 15 years service already, and someone aged 58 with 30 years of previous service. We have compared what they would get by way of pension if the current scheme remains in place with what they might get if the scheme was replaced by a defined contribution scheme, with a couple of alternative levels of church contributions, one of which is the same for all members, and the other of which has contributions that rise as people get older. The overall message is that we see a good possibility that we will be able to design a really good alternative pension scheme, which has a very good chance of delivering to members broadly the same, or in some cases better pension outcomes than would be the case if the current schemes remain in place. The work required is not just about finalising the proposed contribution rates. For example, we will need to work out what to do about death in service benefits and about ill health early retirement, neither of which would be dealt with in a standard defined contribution scheme. Although these things only affect a minority of members, when they do, they are vitally important, and they are relatively costly. Also, because members of a defined contribution scheme have a lot more personal responsibility for, as well as flexibility in, the way they plan for retirement, and then plan their income during retirement, we need to think about how the Church will ensure that members are properly and well informed, and that they are encouraged to plan properly and supported in that. An important factor in choosing the governance model for any new pension scheme will be the quality of information and support that members are likely to receive. The Church will also want to encourage members to take appropriate, independent, and regular financial advice during their working lives, and especially in the years leading up to retirement, as well as after retirement. Our short-term objective is to enable the members of General Assembly to have an informed discussion about the future of the 2 URC pension schemes and to make a decision in principle about the future direction of travel. That decision in principle is necessary before we incur significant costs in developing detailed proposals about possible alternative arrangements. If General Assembly gives the go-ahead, we hope to bring some of the detail to November's meeting of Assembly Executive or Mission Council, and then to bring final and detailed proposals to next year's General Assembly. If General Assembly approves those proposals, that would enable a new scheme to come into effect from, say, January 2023.
Thanks, John. And thank you too for listening. We hope this conversation has helped clarify the pensions issue for you. The paper for General Assembly contains a lot more detail. If you have any questions, by all means get in touch with us. We really value your input.